Hello, welcome back. I'm Tex, and this is episode 6 of Lunar Industries, an Orbiter 2016 video series loosely based on the movie called Moon. In the previous episode, we launched to the ESS space station, but in this episode, we're actually going to start out back at Brighton Beach so that we can plan our trip back to the Earth. If you'd like to fly the series on your own, I've just released a scenario pack that I will link in the video description below. It includes lots of scenarios from various phases of the flight. Each scenario will have a set of instructions that explains what the goals are for that particular scenario. So please do enjoy, happy orbiting, and let's go ahead and get started with this episode. Alright, here we are in the XR2 on the surface of the moon at Brighton Beach. What we need to do now is go ahead and plan our flight back to the Earth. In order to save time, I went ahead and filled the vessel up with enough fuel for the flight. We're not going to need as much getting back, but we also topped everything off in the LOX tanks to 6 days of LOX for our crew members. Taking a look at the payload view, you can see I have 2 LOX containers. They're currently technically empty LOX containers, but because it was the only containers that would fit in the XR2, we're just going to call these supplies. So we're just going to have to use a little bit of imagination, and but we are bringing something back from the moon with us. So there you go. Let's go ahead and close the cargo bay doors. And while that's happening, we're going to jump over into the glass cockpit, and we're going to start things out with interplanetary. Now I want to get back to Cape Canaveral, where we departed from, so I'm going to use the base approach program to calculate this. So we're going to change the reference to Earth. And let's see, we need to press page and source, and we need to set the source to the moon. Okay, so now let's go ahead and target KSC. I have renamed that, by the way, in the config file. Okay, so we're going to set the altitude to 65 kilometers. Re-entry angle at 5.5 degrees. And anticipation angle to 45 degrees. These are all values that I've gotten from Dimitri and David Courtney's video. Very helpful. Check that out on YouTube for more detailed instructions on how to use this. So now I'm just increasing the hint, which is just time in seconds, until a trajectory is found back to Earth. And you can see here is one that's looking about 5 days. Let's see, eject is 58005, and periapsis time is 58010. So that's about 5 days of flight. And it actually looks like that will be daytime at Cape Canaveral, which is also what I want. So currently the escape vector velocity is shown down there at the bottom, but that's going to change as we adjust the plan. So that plan will work. So now what we need to do is just go ahead and get off the ground and get into a parking orbit. So let's get the vessel set up, turn on strobe and beacon. Okay, so let's turn on the surface HUD. And let's switch over to the surface launch program. And we need to make sure that's slaved to the base approach. Op mode is on base approach. We'll press projection. You can see our launch heading there is about 69 degrees. So we're almost facing our launch heading. We just need to rotate to the right a little bit. Once we lift off the ground, so APU's on, external cooling off, switch to RCS mode rotation, open hover doors, deploy the radiator. And we're going to get off the ground here momentarily. Okay, so we'll enable the hover engines, gears coming up, and we're going to rotate over to 69 degrees it was. Full power on the main engines. We can turn the APU off for now. And we'll bring the hover engines down. Actually, let's turn that on real quick now that our hover engines are no longer needed. We'll go ahead and just close those hover doors while we're thinking about it. We're going to jump over into the glass cockpit. So we're going to monitor EIN over on the left side of the right MFD, the surface launch program. Because we launched in the correct launch heading, we want to make sure that EIN gets as close to 0 as possible. That's basically a relative inclination for the parking orbit for our ejection burn back to Earth. So a pretty typical lunar orbit insert here, basically just pointing straight forward and burning the engines. Of course, the difference between Orbiter 2010 and 2016 is we actually have terrain, so we do have to concern ourselves a little bit about mountains appearing in front of us, but I think we'll be okay. So we're going to go for a very low lunar orbit, somewhere around apoapsis of 20K or so. EIN is nice and low there, almost on 0. Right above it you can see apoapsis. So let's very carefully not overshoot that. We're at almost 20K, and there's a little over 20. It's about 24.45 kilometers apoapsis, and EIN is pretty darn low there, almost perfectly on 0. So that is very acceptable. So we are now safely in orbit. It is an unstable orbit, so depending on where the ejection burn is set to take place, we may have to circularize the orbit. So we've started the interval timer, and we will use that for our entire trip back to the Earth. Just take a quick look outside. You can see a few little bumps here and there, but pretty flat around these parts. So I anticipate that our altitude will probably get high enough before we have to worry about hitting any terrain. Okay, so go back to the glass cockpit and let's go to menu. And we're going to open the orbit eject program, and again we're going to make sure that's slave to base approach and press projection. So you can actually see that the ejection point is just behind our current position, so we're definitely going to have to circularize the orbit. We're going to reach apoapsis before the ejection point. So sort of just works out that way sometimes. But obviously if the ejection point was before apoapsis, it wouldn't make any sense to circularize the orbit. So, alright, so taking a look at burn time MFD, we have about 1,241 meters per second. That's fuel in our main tank only. That is not counting what we have in the RCS tank. Okay, so we have the circularized program opened up on the left MFD there. And basically what we're going to do is just go ahead and coast up to apoapsis, and we're going to circularize the orbit before we fine-tune our plan back to Earth. Just enjoying the last views of the moon here before we leave everything behind us and get back home. Let's see if we can find our home. Should be somewhere up here in the sky. I think I see it. There it is. Very cool. So that's where we're heading. We do have some terrain above it, or in front of us, but it looks like our velocity vector is going to clear it, no problem. So once again, we should be okay. We're already at just now 9 kilometers above the surface. So we've got about a quarter of an orbit to go until we reach apoapsis. You can actually see apoapsis over on the right MFD there. It's the small circle that is not filled in. Periapsis on the opposite side of the moon is currently under the surface. So because of that, we are technically in an unstable orbit, which we will circularize, and that'll give us plenty of time to adjust our plan before we reach the ejection point, which is indicated by the blue line extending out from the center of the circle, representing the Earth, out to the end. And you can see the sort of the blue curve would be our trajectory. So we're approaching lunar sunset here. Just enjoying the views. We're at 10 times acceleration, and we're approaching apoapsis. So I'm just going to rotate to sort of keep the vessel pointed prograde, because we know we're going to have to burn prograde to circularize the orbit. Also switched over to the orbit HUD. Okay, so just activated the prograde autopilot just to help keep the vessel situated prograde here. So we're at 100 times acceleration. We're quickly approaching apoapsis, back to 10 times, and now normal time. Alright, so when we get to apoapsis, we're going to hit auto burn. Almost there. Okay. Oh, okay, now that didn't work. It was trying to auto burn the plan. Wasn't sure. I didn't know that that would actually do that, so we're gonna have to manually circularize here. Not ideal, but not a big deal. We'll go ahead and use the circularize MFD over on the left side to make sure we're pointed the right direction. Just a few bursts of the engine there. Little linear RCS, and eccentricity is right there on 0. So perfectly circularized. No big deal. So let's go back to interplanetary. So we're going to leave the orbit eject program up on the right side. On the left side, we're going to go to course and delta velocity. We're going to set. Let's hit projection, and let's put in our time to ejection is counting down currently on the right side there, 4,317. Let's put it at 15 and enter. And then we're going to put in delta velocity forward, which is listed on the right side, 941 meters per second. All right, there we go. So we're done with the orbit eject program. Let's just time accelerate. We're going to get about halfway, or we're going to get on the other side of the moon from the eject point, which is roughly about here. We'll go a little bit further, actually. Let's go ahead and take it just under 3,000 seconds from the burn, so we get more accurate predictions, and that's where we are. So we're going to share the left side with this right side, and let's go ahead and go to configuration and set up our landing target, which is KSC, Cape Canaveral, and let's open the map program. Press projection, change reference to Earth, and let's press display so we can see the moon's orbit around the Earth there in the center. Turn off auto zoom, go to the page, next page, turn on the plan, turn on sphere of influence, and we're going to press mode so we get our angle to Brighton Beach and our longitude and latitude coordinates, which is all going to be very useful for ensuring that we arrive at a precise point in the atmosphere. Let's go ahead and switch the reference for map MFD over to the Earth and target Cape Canaveral, KSC. Again, I renamed that in my config file. You can see the coordinates there, longitude and latitude coordinates for KSC. So we're going to use that for calculating our ejection burn here. So on the delta velocity program, pretty typical to before, we're going to adjust the variables time of ejection, delta velocity forward, plane change inward, outward. We're going to adjust these variables so that we can get a periapsis somewhere around 60 to 65 kilometers. But we also need to monitor the angle to Cape Canaveral down on the bottom left corner of the right MFD there on the map program. But this is where things get a little more confusing. In addition to setting our periapsis and our angle, we also need to be monitoring the longitude and latitude coordinates listed on the map program there. And we also should take a look at the equatorial inclination. So the longitude and latitude coordinates are telling us where exactly we're going to be hitting the atmosphere. And that's important because if we want to do a direct entry and not have to go back around the planet another orbit before we land at our base, we want to hit the atmosphere far enough back from our base of choice so that we have enough time to do an aero capture, slow down, re-enter, and land immediately. Now, you can get the longitude and latitude coordinates of your base by looking at the map MFD for the Earth. But what we want to consider is if we take a look at this graphic that Dimitri was so kind to create for me, you'll notice it's basically a screenshot of the map program in Orbiter. In the center there, you'll see Cape Canaveral is targeted, and you have 3 circles, a red, a green, and a blue one, surrounding Cape Canaveral. The radius of the red circle, that is from Cape Canaveral's location out to the red circle, is 30 degrees. And the green circle radius is 45 degrees, and the blue is 60 degrees. So we know that the map MFD here has the grids on it, in which the whole world is broken up into these grids that we use for the longitude and latitude coordinates. And one of these boxes, Cape Canaveral, currently sits toward the top end of a box that encompasses the Caribbean Ocean, part of Central America and South America. That entire box, from one end to the other, from the top to the bottom, from the left to the right, right to the left, whatever, is 30 degrees. So if you look at where Cape Canaveral is, and you look at where the red circle is, that looks like about 30 degrees. So the red circle is indicating the absolute closest that we could hit the atmosphere and have time to slow down, re-enter, and land immediately. But if you're right on that red circle, it's going to be a pretty aggressive braking maneuver. So ideally, you'd probably want to come in around the green circle, or maybe somewhere between the green and the red would be okay. But that would give you plenty of time to slow down, re-enter, and land. So it's more ideal. The blue circle is the outer limit. You probably don't want to come in much further out than the blue circle, because then it's going to be a really long re-entry process, probably a little too comfortable. But the other thing we want to consider is the equatorial inclination. So if you look at the interplanetary map program, above the longitude and latitude coordinates, you'll see EQI, so that's telling us the equatorial inclination. Now, of course, a prograde orbit is anywhere between 0 and 90 degrees. 90 degrees is a polar orbit, and anything over 90 is a retrograde orbit. Now, typically we orbit the Earth prograde, which means we're orbiting in the same direction the Earth spins. That's the direction I would prefer to come in, because that means that we'll have less velocity than we would if we came in retrograde. So ideally, I'm looking for an equatorial inclination somewhere under 90 degrees. But if we go right at 90 degrees or slightly over 90 degrees, maybe 91, 92 degrees, something like that, that's not terrible. That just means we're coming in a more polar orbit orientation. So we'd be coming in directly over the South Pole and heading due north up to Cape Canaveral. So just bear that in mind. If you come in with your equatorial inclination incredibly high, over 90 degrees, you're going to have a lot more velocity that you're going to have to scrub. You're going to have to contend with that extra velocity that you're coming in with versus coming in prograde in the same direction the Earth is spinning. Now that we understand how to use longitude, latitude, and equatorial inclination to hit the atmosphere at a precise location, we don't want to forget the importance of periapsis and angle. So of course, periapsis just ensures that we hit the atmosphere at an altitude that ensures we don't burn up, but we also don't skip out. So we really want to make sure that that is between 60 and 65 kilometers. That's perhaps the most important thing we're looking at. But also the angle is probably the second most important thing, because that ensures that we will pass directly over the base. Now, of course, we know that an angle of 0 degrees means we would pass directly over the base. However, we don't actually want it right on 0 degrees as we're setting this up, because it's going to take us some time to get from periapsis down to the base. We've got to do the aero capture, slow down, re-enter, and then we'll be landing back at the base. During that time, the Earth is going to continue to rotate, of course. So what we're actually going to be looking for is, if we're coming in prograde, then we would want the angle to be slightly negative. So that means that if you looked at the MapMFD and your trajectory, as you were hitting the atmosphere, the base would actually be to the left of your trajectory shown on the MapMFD. And as you conduct your aero capture and re-entry, the Earth continues to rotate, and so the base would literally just move directly over to your trajectory. So flip that around. If you're in the southern hemisphere, I believe it is, or if you're coming in retrograde, then you would want the angle to be slightly positive. So just bear that in mind. The angle is important, but we're not actually aiming for 0 degrees exactly. We want to sort of aim off of 0 just a bit to compensate for the Earth's rotation. Taking a look at the numbers right now, I think we're getting pretty close to a workable plan. Let me just mess around with the variables a little bit longer here, and we'll take a look at what we're going to fly here in just a minute. Okay, let's just freeze frame the picture here for a minute, and let's take a look at this plan that we're going to fly. You can see that we have a periapsis of 64.48 kilometers, so that is perfectly acceptable. We also noticed that the second most important number, the angle there to Cape Canaveral, is at 0.113 degrees. Now, when I actually recorded this video during the flying the actual flight, I didn't realize at the time that it should be slightly negative to account for the Earth's rotation, but it's close enough to zero that it's not going to really present any problems. But you will see in the next episode how that actually is affected during the aero capture and re-entry process. We'll also take a look at the longitude and latitude coordinates there. So we are coming in, we're hitting the atmosphere 89.156 degrees west and a latitude of 4.330 degrees south. So that means we're actually coming in, let's see, Cape Canaveral was at 80 point something degrees west. So that means we're coming in slightly west of Cape Canaveral, but we're getting most of that distance away from Cape Canaveral to the south. So of course, 4.330 degrees south means we're coming in 4 degrees south of the equator. So we're going to be coming in somewhere probably just south of the Galapagos Islands. If we take a look at this this map here, you can see this is where we would actually be hitting the atmosphere, and then our trajectory would take us up this direction toward Cape Canaveral. So, and also the equatorial inclination at 76.380 degrees plays into that. You'll notice that the inclination being 76 degrees is getting closer to a polar orbit, but not really. I mean, we're still prograde orbit with that inclination. Now, above the EQI, I didn't talk about this, but the heading number is just telling you your basically what your heading is going to be. And of course, if you look at the map and where we're coming in at, you'll notice that that's about 13.659 degrees as shown on the map program here. Some of the other numbers that we're looking at, you can see MJD, so that's telling us our periapsis date. Below that is PET, so that's the time to periapsis. That's not really being affected right now because we're not currently moving toward periapsis at the moment. We're still in orbit around the moon. And then below that you have periapsis velocity. So that's just telling us our velocity, what our actual velocity will be at periapsis. So this is a perfectly flyable plan, and I think this is what we're gonna go ahead and do. So let's go ahead and fly this plan. Let's hit page, burn vectors, and you can see the burn vectors there. We're still a little ways out from the burn. We can turn strobe off and make sure everything looks good here. We have 5 days and 23 hours of LOX remaining, which should be enough. Might be a little close, but it should be enough. Take a look at burn time once again. We have just over 1200 meters per second in delta V. And we'll hit the auto burn button. So we're looking at, according to burn time on the, IMFD on the left side, we're looking at about 925 meters per second and change, not really too much. And that means we're going to have a little bit of fuel left in the main tanks. So we'll probably just transfer what fuel we have left in the main tanks into RCS after the burn, because we're no longer going to need our main engines once we complete the ejection burn here. So the autopilot for IMFD is taking care of the burn for us here. The timer is counting down. We're about a minute out from the burn at 10 times acceleration. Just slow time down real quick. Take a look at our periapsis above the moon. That's going to be our lowest periapsis. You will want to check that depending on how much inward velocity you put in. But you can see our delta V inward was a negative number, so that means we actually have outward put in.
Low.
So the burn, as I was talking, is being conducted, and it is now done. There we go. So I've turned the plan off on the map side over there. I'm just using linear RCS, just translating forward, just cleaning the burn up. IMFD doesn't always get the burn perfect. So just translating forward a little bit, you can see I brought periapsis down closer to where I would want it to be, but I'm also looking at angle there at the bottom. You can see it's at 0.076 degrees now. So just sort of playing around with it a little bit and getting everything sort of as fine-tuned as I can, but that's looking pretty good. Let's see, just play around with it a little bit more. Oh, we're looking at 0.018 degrees on the angle. Periapsis is 61 kilometers, and our longitude is 89.2 degrees. Pretty much exactly the same as it was before. We have 307 meters per second in delta V remaining. That is only in the main tanks, once again. So, so there you go. We have completed the burn. Let's just transfer everything from our main tank into the RCS tank. This is going to be a single burn operation. We will be really not have to do any other burns at all. The map MFD is, I'm sorry, the map program on IMFD is so accurate that basically it's going to take us right where we wanted it to there. So we of course got an alarm there. The main fuel was depleted, no big deal. Take a look outside as we coast away from the moon. It's been fun, it's been real, but now it's time to get back home. Alright, if we ever get the Earth in view here, I'll kill rotation. It's nice to sort of take a look at where we're going. I'll just turn off the HUD there so it's not so disorienting as we're spinning around. May end up just killing rotation if I don't find the Earth here. So you can see our gravity G-field contribution on the left MFD over there is for the moon. It's referenced on the moon. It's currently in the red. So that means we're out of the moon's sphere of influence. You can also see that on the map program over on the right side. Let's go ahead and let's hit projection. And there you go. You can see our orbit heading down toward the Earth. The white circle is representing us. So you can see how our trajectory is going to be taking us down toward the Earth in the center there. So let's go ahead and reference the Earth on the orbit MFD. We're at a 10,000 time acceleration, and you can see the moon has gotten awfully small there in the distance. So we're going to see the G-field contribution on the orbit MFD slowly increase as you can see the little white circle on the right MFD, the map program, as we're about to fall inside of the Earth's sphere of influence, and we are now under the Earth's sphere of gravitational influence. So we can hit prograde, orient the vessel toward the way we're heading there. Our velocity is carrying us down toward the Earth as the Earth pulls us down into it. So we'll just rotate and get the Earth centered in our view here and watch as it rapidly grows as we descend down toward the Earth. So taking a look at our numbers on the map program, periapsis is shown at 60 kilometers. We may do just a slight little linear RCS adjustment to optimize our periapsis altitude once we get much closer. May not worry about that until the next part. But so this episode, yeah, we're going to take us all the way down to the Earth, but we're not going to have enough time to do the reentry, so that will be covered in the next and final episode of the series. There you can see Antarctica, the South Pole, just below us. So taking a look at the equatorial inclination at 76 degrees, I believe it was there. You can see how that actually is graphically demonstrated there. You can see as we're coming in over the bottom of the Earth, and we're going to head up toward Cape Canaveral. So everything still looks good on IMFD. We can turn on the orbit HUD again, and we'll just point the vessel prograde. And I think that is probably going to be a good place to end this episode. We're at 5 days and just over 10 minutes on the interval timer that I started. Of course, we got that warning for locks, and that was to be expected, but we should have plenty of locks to get down onto the ground. It's going to be a little close, but not dangerously close. We're not very far from actually falling into the atmosphere and landing back at Cape Canaveral. Alright, so that's going to wrap up this episode, guys. Once again, hope you're all doing really well. Thank you very much for following. It's been really a lot of fun. I hope you're enjoying the series, and I hope you'll join me next week for the final episode. And we're going to hopefully re-enter and land safely back at Cape Canaveral with no surprises. So take care, guys. We'll see you then.